Lying boss loses multi-million-dollar contract. This was a few years ago. I was working for one of the biggest employers in my state, running a government-funded program. Part of running these government-funded programs is to achieve KPIs. Edit. KPIs equals Key Performance Indicators. To justify the funding, keep this in mind. Things started well. We were achieving a lot, and my boss regularly called me her 2IC per second in command. Although it was unofficial, it was nice to get recognition. The boss was somewhat forgetful, and when a mistake was made it would be put it on me or one of the other staff, but this wasn't common early on, so I just started asking for everything in writing, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. As the staff for the program grew, we started hiring more and more people, and that's when the cracks started to show. One of the first things I remember was when I was on the interview panel with a few of her hand-picked staff interviewing for another vacant position. She told the entire interview panel that she wanted to speak with us before we scored each interviewer, essentially manipulating the panel's scores of each applicant. Before long, she had a cherry-picked staff of people who shared her political beliefs regardless of how competent they were at the job. She also started making jokes at my expense in front of the whole team because I was the only male. She would demand I change my workdays when she wanted me on weekends, wasn't paid penalty rates, and refused time off for things Shendi didn't think was important, like watching the football match of the year, even if I asked to use leave well in advance. Ever since starting, I had been responsible for recording all of our interactions with people as KPIs. I self-taught myself Microsoft Excel and created a monster spreadsheet that broke everything down. This responsibility was supposed to be temporary and would be taken off me once we hired somebody. When we did eventually hire someone to take over the reporting, the person was absolutely incompetent. They were a nice enough person, but they would sit there chatting all day, and every single week, they butchered the KPI reporting. The boss refused to hold them accountable and instead just told me to fix it every week. She had also instructed me to record every single time a person looked our way as an interaction for our KPIs. So long as we stuck up an A4 sheet of paper with our logo on it, we would rip out our phones and start counting every single person that walked by. I had tried to argue that this wasn't going to be seen as proper engagement if her higher UPS or the government decided to look into it, but she demanded we do it. The first instance of MC. For over a year, I continued to enter in all of this false data as reportable for our KPIs. I also made out that it was incredibly time-consuming. Nobody else, including the boss, understood how it worked, when in reality I had become so good at it, I could fix the worst mistakes in like 20 minutes. As time went on, she kept handing more and more work to me. Every time we had a staff member that would goof up, it became my problem, and she would instruct me to either do their work for them or hold me accountable for their lack of work. She continued to berate me and make fun of me in front of other staff. She would pull me aside and give me unofficial verbal warnings for things I hadn't done, and even threatened me with a bad reference when she found out I had put in an application for another job. I didn't get it because ITNWASNT in my industry, but me just wanted out. Every time the boss had time off, she unofficially put me in charge, telling everyone that I was responsible but had no extra pay. We ended up hiring someone else to fill a different role, something completely unrelated to the day-to-day operations or even the industry in general. This person was great at their job, but they had no experience in the job and wasn't even a full-time employee. Then the boss was leaving for another holiday. She pulled me into her office alone, and told me the new part-timer would be in charge while she was away, with the temporary increase in pay. At this point, I had finally had enough. I decided I would do the bare minimum until I could find another job. A couple of months after, COVID hit, and we were all told to work from home. During our first Zoom meeting, she listed the responsibilities that she expected us all to do. My main responsibility was to finish 2 small projects and to maintain the KPIs, which shouldn't have even been my responsibility. All up, this was maybe an hour's work per day. She wanted an email at the end of every day reporting what we had done. Second instance of malicious compliance. I spent the next 2 months working an hour every morning from home, only doing the responsibilities she had set out for me. I would play Xbox for the rest of the day, and at around close of business, I would hit send on the email I had sitting there since 9 a.m. I then found another job, and a year later, I went on to start my own business in the industry. At around the same time my new business reached more staff than she had employed. I found out that the program went under review, and the boss lost the contract for the company. I am assuming they finally delved into that spreadsheet and found the lies. And by losing the contract, she also lost her job because without the contract there was no job. Edit. She did a hell of a lot more things directed at me, like making me drive the company car only between the office and home. So I had no social life. And then when I handed it back because I wanted to do things after work, she let other staff use it for whatever they wanted. I was so glad when I found out she had butchered the contract. Well done for getting out before she collapsed the contract around her. Nice, you're your own boss now. The only true way to get a competent boss. Sorry. Op. It sounds like she was a toxic boss who was a govet hangerin. I'm glad to hear you got out and have better work now. I'm also glad to hear that her funding was cut. Sounds bad, but also sounds like she wasn't properly using the funding anyway. I'm not familiar with other countries' government-funded programs, but wasn't there anywhere you could have reported her? I'll give you a bad reference. I'm not using you as a reference. CHBUWH. No, you have to. Honestly, it sounds like you could have stood up for yourself more. People behave like this because no one ever puts them in check. If you were doing everyone's job, you had pull. Q, not K. People always try to make the things being measured look as good as possible. That's because it's reasonable to assume that what's being measured is what's most important. Some things are easy to measure but unimportant, and it's a trap that bosses fall into often. Those loose contracts definitely need tightening. If the fraud had gone on for much longer, I'd have added one more KPI measurement. Interaction duration. Wouldn't have taken them long to figure out their average interaction time was nothing. She was discriminating against you for being a man. She sounds horrible and I hope she never worked in that field again. Someday you'll see her on the news for embezzlement. Loses. I read that story thinking there was a satisfying conclusion. You let your boss abuse you for years until you took another job. Luckily before the lies she had you create were found out. More like a dodged bullet than malicious compliance. 80% whining, 10% unnecessary details, 10% actual story of the boss doing something incorrectly and eventually having it break down. The behavior from your boss is called targeting and is considered harassment. Loses? Sounds like every company I had ever worked for. Unfortunately, most started out good, but got increasingly incompetent until it got to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore. So, good for you. I'm glad you're doing much better now. TLDR, this is not an Excel spreadsheet. Well done for getting out. Sounds like she was intimidated by your competence. Unfortunately common enough amongst women who got jobs based on their gender and not ability. But the patriarchy! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Working for one of the biggest employers in the state and you don't know how to spell the word lose. What a complete starts with B, rhymes with which. Corrupt, manipulative, and cruel face vomiting. I'm glad you got away from this bully. And I'm also glad she reaped what she sowed. Thumbs up.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.